What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtnett, and it is time for the College Football Playoff National Championship game. The number 1 Michigan Wolverines, 14-0, playing against the number 2 Washington Huskies, also 14-0, at NRG Stadium in Houston, Texas on Monday night. It is a massive game, the biggest game of the college football season, and it is one that has a lot of hype behind it and is an exciting matchup as well. It's first time there's no SEC team in the national championship game in 9 years. It also, interestingly enough, bookends the college football playoff 4-team version with a Big Ten Pac-12 matchup, and obviously this game is also a future Big Ten matchup. Both of these teams will be playing next year. And so there's a lot to like about this championship game. It's two teams that haven't won a national championship in more than 25 years, two teams that their last national championship came in the 1990s. And this national championship game is only the third in the college football playoff era to feature a pair of 14-0 undefeated teams. So there's a lot to look forward to. I'm going to dive into the important matchups in this one, but before I do, if you want to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you never miss a College Football Talk video. But without further ado, let's dive into this national championship preview. And in this video, I know typically I'll do like a deep dive on the roster and stuff like that, but you already know, if you've seen previous videos, what these two rosters look like. I've done deep dives for Michigan before their game against Ohio State and before their semifinal against Alabama, and for Washington, deep dive before their Pac-12 championship against Oregon, and of course the Sugar Bowl against Texas. So if you want to know what the rosters look like, for the most part, little has changed since especially those semifinal games. But one area to watch, though, actually is something that has changed, and that's the injury status of Washington running back Dylan Johnson. Johnson had a phenomenal year this year. I think kind of flew under the radar a little bit because of the Huskies' high-powered passing attack, but he suffered an injury right at the very end, literally on Washington's last play from scrimmage before a punt, I believe. And so it's, you never want to see that injury happen. Thankfully, it does look like Kalen DeBoer, Washington's head coach, did say that Johnson's status does look like he'll be able to play. He's taking fewer reps in practice this week leading up to the game. Either way, it's going to be something to keep an eye on, because if Johnson can't go, will Washington lean even more heavily on the passing attack, or will they lean on a couple of backup running backs? And so that'll be something to keep an eye on. Again, it might not factor in too much because the amount of carries that Johnson will get shouldn't be too overwhelming, but if that foot's bothering him, we could see action from the other Washington running backs. But here we go. Looking at this game, the big key matchup is, of course, and this is the one that I'm going to spend really most of this video talking about because it's so important. It is the Washington passing attack going up against the Michigan defense, and both the pressure that the Wolverines provide and the secondary. And so let's kind of set the framework for this. You've got the literal best offensive line in the nation, the Huskies, who were winners of the Joe Moore Award, given to the best offensive line in the country. Tackles Troy Fontenot and Roger Rosengarten provide a lot of excellent pass protection on the outside. Texas had 0 sacks, a goose egg in the semifinal game in the Sugar Bowl, and Washington's allowed just 11 all season. So that is, to allow 11 sacks in an entire season is incredibly impressive, and it shows that this Washington pass protection is probably the best in the country. Again, the offensive line has been awarded that. I think when I talk about Michigan, their offensive line is very comparable. They're a bit more ground friendly, but they pass the ball a lot more than people think, but I'll touch on that more later. Michigan's pressure mainly comes from a variety of guys, and that showed in the Rose Bowl against Alabama. They had 5 sacks from 5 different players just in the first half. But some of the guys who stand out, Jalen Harrell is the leader with 6.5, Josiah Stewart with 5.5, Derek Moore with 5, and Braden McGregor with 4.5. So each of those 4 guys has been consistent throughout the season in getting to the quarterback, and obviously that doesn't even show the pressures that they get or the QB hits or hurries that they might get when they're rushing the quarterback. So this Michigan pass rush is among the best, certainly in the Big Ten, and I would say probably nationally. They obviously have the number one scoring defense. I think that statistic is maybe a little misleading because of how honestly bad and awful a lot of the Big Ten offenses were this year. So I think scoring defense is a little bit misleading, but it does showcase that this team is consistent week in and week out at limiting their opponents from scoring. And one other guy that isn't up there with those other four guys in terms of the total stat count, but I think he's probably right behind them, and that's Mason Graham. He had a huge game against Alabama. I think, if I'm not mistaken, well, if he wasn't, he probably should have been named the Rose Bowl defensive most valuable player. Had a couple of big sacks, some big tackles, and everything against the Crimson Tide to lead the Wolverines in that 27-20 victory. However, they'll be going up against a guy who can often get the ball out quick, or if not, is able to move around in the pocket a little bit and maybe even scramble here and there, and that is Heisman runner-up Michael Penix Jr., the Washington quarterback, who was the Maxwell Award winner, and he didn't win the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award, which is another award for a top quarterback, but he won the Maxwell and was runner-up in the Heisman, and just has had an incredible season up to this point. And there's so many things that he does well. He's able to see off DBs and get the ball to his receivers, and he's helped by having three different 1,000-yard receivers either this year or last year at some point in their careers. That's obviously Rome Odunze, who was the Biletnikoff winner. You've got Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan, who McMillan struggled with injuries this year but was a 1,000-yard receiver last year. So really, it truly is a three-headed beast at wide receiver for the Washington Huskies. And then one other guy, and when you have a team that can pass like this, there's going to be a lot of guys who show up in the stats in terms of getting receptions here and there. But I think one other guy who's a key piece, Michigan's going to have to really defend against the first three guys that I mentioned. But I think one other guy who had a really solid game against Alabama as well, I think 6 receptions for 59 yards, is tight end Jack Westover. I think Westover is kind of what I like to call, and I think Colston Loveland does a little bit of this for Michigan, kind of a connecting piece. He's that guy who can get a catch over the middle of the field, maybe go on an out route to the sideline or corner route, or goes, slant or a post or a dig or something like that, to get open kind of over the middle of the field or along the sidelines, and kind of gets those pickups of yardage that kind of can keep a drive moving when maybe one of the other three guys even are kind of limited by the coverage. And he's a guy Westover can kind of find those openings in the defense. And so I think he is a key player to keep an eye on for the Michigan defense. But what does that Michigan secondary look like? Well, first of all, they're really led by two guys. And again, if you want the full breakdown, all the names, see the previous videos, or maybe I'll pop up some of those guys here. But I want to focus really on the key players for this video. And they're led by an aggressive cornerback, Will Johnson, who has 3 interceptions this season, has a litany of pass deflections and pass breakups, and does a really excellent job of getting to the football, but more importantly, making sure that the receiver that he's covering, or if in man, or if he's in zone, the area that he's assigned to is basically a no-fly zone many times. And he has emerged as probably one of the top cornerbacks in college football. If not, it might be a little bit strong to say that he's the best, but when you're on the team that's playing for a national championship and you're the best cornerback on that team, it's hard to argue really for anybody else. And then, of course, the versatile nickelback, Mike Sainristil, the converted wide receiver. He has really impressed me. I think looking at it, he's the guy who can make some of those more like exciting highlight reel plays. He has the 5 interceptions. He maybe, I'd have to see the numbers on pass deflections and pass breakups, what it looks like, but he's the guy who will make that big play for you defensively. Will Johnson is really a consistent, aggressive cornerback who keeps the targets and especially receptions low for the guys that he's going against. Sainristil, meanwhile, is getting in there, making the hard hits. That's not to say that Johnson doesn't do that, but he's making the hard hits, making the tackles, he's making the interceptions, and he's making the big plays. I look at the Maryland game where he had 2 interceptions in that game, I believe, taking one back for a pick 6, and just has had a phenomenal season. Of course, another guy like a Rod Moore who got the game-sealing interception, the safety for the Wolverines against Ohio State. The secondary is probably, I would say, the best in the country. The defense overall has the third best defense by opponent efficiency, a 101.52, and I would imagine what that means is like the efficiency of moving the ball, of picking up first downs, yards per play, all those kind of things combined together. I don't exactly know what the metrics are to get that opponent offensive efficiency, but either way, Michigan is third best in the country at that. And I think that shows better than scoring defense or yards per game allowed what a defense can truly do, because it kind of takes like an average of all those things. They also really lock down in the red zone, and they don't give up big plays either, because they have the fewest touchdown passes allowed all season. This Michigan defense, the secondary, has allowed just 7 passing touchdowns to their opponents all season. That is an incredible feat. I'm sure they lead the country by a pretty comfortable margin, or certainly are well ahead of the pack in that area. So this Michigan secondary is, again, I would say probably the best in the country. However, and this is where it's kind of a two-way street here. Michigan has yet to face a test to the level of Washington's passing attack, because I truly believe that Washington probably, I would say almost certainly, has the best passing attack in the country. Michigan was tested somewhat by Maryland, by Tualia Tagovailoa, definitely at times by Ohio State's passing attack with Marvin Harrison Jr. at receiver, Kyle McCord quarterback, Julian Fleming, Emeka Egbuka, but overall did a pretty good job of limiting the Buckeyes as well. But they haven't really quite faced a test like Washington's passing offense. But at the same time, Washington has not faced a secondary that is up to par with this Michigan secondary. Texas has a solid defense, but I would say they're a bit stronger up front. You look at a team like Oregon, they have a well-rounded defense, but they certainly at times found it hard to get stops. I think Oregon's best defensive performance was certainly that game against Colorado, and I think that's because they were really up for the task in that one. And so, again, both of these teams have yet to face a test like this, so that's what makes it kind of tough to predict at times how it goes. I think it will be ebbs and flows in this game, just like basketball being a game of runs. I think football can be too at times. Momentum I think is a little bit bigger because scores don't happen as much as they do in basketball. Scores can really ramp up real quick in basketball, but a turnover here and there, if Michigan can force one, can really halt Washington's momentum. And especially with a short field, and even with a longer field, the Michigan offense should be able to get their scoring done. And off a turnover, that will be a very important piece of this game to watch. Washington does a good job of limiting turnovers. I think Michael Penix Jr. has 9 interceptions this year. So overall, this is the key area to watch. And it's what everybody's talking about, but I wanted to kind of lend my perspective on it, that this is the matchup to watch. You're going to want to be watching, especially Will Johnson. Whether he's I imagine lined up at times against Odunze, against Polk, McMillan. His focus will be making sure that those guys are limited. And so I think it'll be important for maybe some linebackers like a Junior Colson or Michael Barrett or some of those guys from Michigan at limiting Jack Westover and his plays over the middle. So those are all key areas to watch. I think that middle of the field will be very important as well, because the focus obviously and clearly will be kind of those outside, the flanks with the receivers going up against the cornerbacks. But that middle of the field might be where Michigan can either increase their, edge defensively, or where Washington can maybe take advantage of the Wolverines at times. So keep an eye out for that. Again, the big matchup is certainly Washington's passing attack against the Michigan defense. But the other area that is something to keep an eye on, because it is strength against relative weakness. Washington has a pretty good passing defense, and I think the Michigan passing offense is certainly underrated at times. I think they've been overlooked this season. I think J.J. McCarthy is very poised. He does that grounding and meditation before the game, and I think that gets him in the right headspace to be prepared in those moments of strife and pressure to be able to still make a good throw. And he has some really solid wide receivers as well, and tight end Colston Loveland, already mentioned him. Roman Wilson, the wide receiver, and then Cornelius Johnson has made some big plays for the Wolverines as well. And so this passing attack for Michigan is certainly solid, but it's not to the level of how they run the ball. Blake Corum is Michigan's all-time leader in touchdowns scored. He broke that record against Alabama, and he is averaging 4.68 yards per carry. Again, I think that's one of the best metrics for measuring it, rather than yards, because you can have so many carries, and of course then you're going to have a lot of yardage. But I think yards per carries is the key one. It shows that, first of all, the offensive line in front of him is creating that space, creating that push to get him that opening where he's getting already 5 yards down the field just, for an average. Obviously, he's having runs where he'll break off one for longer or a long touchdown even. And it shows that the consistency is there too as well, because you can have a big game maybe that can boost that rushing yard total when you have something like this where your yards per carry are very strong. And that is where Washington is a little bit at risk, I would say, because they allow they're 86 in the country with 4.4 yards per carry, and they allowed 6.8 yards per carry to Texas. And I think the Longhorns maybe passed the ball a little bit more in that game. I'll have to check the final numbers on passing attempts for Quinn Ewers versus rushes for the Texas offense. But it's an area where Michigan can kind of impose their will, and if they're able to stand strong on defense, like I expect them to, certainly at times, it'll be tough throughout the entire game. I'm sure there'll be moments where Washington's offense gets big plays, but if they can really lock in on defense, get stops, get the ball back, and kind of ground their way like they have really over the last 3 years, I think Michigan is in a really favorable position to win the national championship. Special teams, though, I think that kind of covers it for offense versus defense. I think it's pretty clear that the Michigan rushing attack is strong. I think their passing attack is solid, but I think Washington's passing defense matches up well. Kind of just to give my assessment, I think Washington's passing attack versus Michigan's secondary is very, very balanced. I think I would give a slight edge to Washington's passing attack, but I think that just means, that Washington will score a lot of points, but I think Michigan has the potential to do that as well. Of course, their style is a bit more, ground and pound, but I think the Michigan offense overall stands up strongly against the Washington defense, especially in the ground game. So I think it's a fair split. I think Michigan has a slight edge there. Special teams, obviously they had the muff punts in the game against Alabama. One hurt them. The other one didn't really end up hurting them because there was a really good adjustment to keep the ball and avoid a safety or fumbling at the 1 yard line, what it could have been. So special teams, I think the edge is maybe slightly to Washington. Just going over going over the semifinal games. Ultimately, it does have to come down to a prediction. I always love making these videos, and I love making the predictions, even when I'm wrong. I was very, very close to getting almost exactly right on the Washington game. I said 38-33. It ended up being 37-31. And the Michigan game, I was not. I picked Alabama. I thought they had what it takes to get it done. I thought a Nick Saban coach team would be able to get the job done, but Michigan proved me wrong. And so credit to the Wolverines. One other quick thing to look at though before I offer this prediction. Michigan this season is 3-0 in one-score games, and that is an indicator of two things. Number one, you can tell by the number, they haven't been in a lot of one-score games, but they're still able to get the job done when they are. So if there's going to be a team that pulls away in this one, logic would kind of suggest that it'd be Washington because of their passing attack and how they can get down and score quickly. But I think Michigan has some potential to do that as well. They could still hit you for big plays in the passing game or in the ground game, of course, as well. Donovan Edwards being a guy that can get some runs as well, even while Corum is kind of the favored back. Washington, meanwhile, though, is 8-0. So that again, and for Washington, that means two things, maybe even more so than Michigan. It means that, one, they allow teams to keep games close, maybe some games that shouldn't be so close, a game like the Arizona State game earlier this year. But at the same time, it shows that they have what it takes to make a key stop late if they have to, and that's something their defense might not be the best in metrics, but what they're able to do, this Huskies team, is get stops late. You look at the game against Oregon, they get a stop there. You look at the game against Texas, I mean, it came down right to the very end to a pass, but a great pass deflection by Elijah Jackson to steal that one. And so it's a definitely, the key area to watch in this one, again, is Michigan secondary against Washington's passing attack. I think, of course, when there's one thing that everybody's going to be keeping an eye on, you have to look for kind of the minor things that maybe will give a team an edge. And I think Michigan just has a little bit more in this one than what Washington does. And I think they'll be able to limit Washington's offense just enough to get the job done. And so my prediction for the 2024 College Football National Championship game is Michigan 31, Washington 24. I think the Wolverines get their first national championship since 1997, and their first that isn't shared since even longer before that. So a huge year either way for both of these teams, and if the Michigan Wolverines are able to get the job done, it will be just joyous scenes on the streets of Ann Arbor, and something that will put the Big Ten kind of back into the limelight. Of course, this game does either way. It puts it kind of back to the forefront, at least for a season, because Washington joining the conference next year. But let me know your thoughts on the national championship game. Let me know if there's anything that you thought I missed. Again, I wanted to focus kind of on just a couple of key areas rather than going through like a list of names, is kind of what roster breakdowns can feel like sometimes. So those are my thoughts on the championship game. That's my prediction. I have the Michigan Wolverines taking their 12th national championship. But thank you so much for taking the time to watch College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burtnett, signing out. Peace.